Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce the mysterious Mr. Enter. Okay, I'm not even going to be coy with what this is about. This is his review of Turning Red. Yes, as usual, I'm very late in talking about the hot button issue. A lot of people expressed how they didn't like this review of his, and I also don't like this review of his. However, this is going to be more interesting than just big take people are making. Let me give a rundown of what people think is happening and what part of the thesis of what I'm going to show is. What the headline is that Mr. Enter said that the movie didn't bring up 9/11 even though it takes place in 2002, and that makes it bad. Which, if true, is an awful thing to say. It's basically demanding a kids movie be treated as though it's an adult drama, and it's completely ridiculous of a point for someone to actually make. Which is why, of course, he didn't actually make that point in the video. Does he mention 9/11 in the video? Yes, but as what I'm gonna play will show, he's not bringing it up to say the movie should have addressed it directly. It is, in essence, a game of telephone being played with what he actually said in the video. That being said, what he said here was also not really a good point, but not as egregiously ridiculous as people made it out to be. So that's what I'm here to do today. I'm here to address the real problems with the review instead of making flashy, incorrect summations that just sound good as a headline. I'm going to actually dive into why I don't like this review. And why I do, actually. There are some good points in here. There's some complaints that he makes that make a lot of sense, even if I don't fully agree with all of them. Some of this intro, I admit, feels a little bit wonky, but, well, it's going to make a lot more sense as we go through the video. So let's just, do that.
So I watched Turning Red recently, the latest Pixar film. What took me so long to see this one? Well, I was actually avoiding it for a couple of reasons. Most notably, the trailer. I think that even people who like this movie will agree that the trailer is really, really bad. Personally, it showed me that everything I didn't like in a movie would be in this one, with a super in-your-face attitude. And it didn't really make any arguments of how a transformation into a red panda could actually carry a movie. It seemed like an incredibly light, simple premise.
Yeah, I get that to an extent. The movie definitely comes across rather in your face from the trailer. If you're not into that, then you're not going to be impressed by the trailer. But the thing I want to discuss is not indicating how turning into a panda could carry a movie. Although, again, it's not like this is outright wrong. It's just something I can really sink my teeth into a counter argument for. So, the movie actually provides hints towards the underlying lore behind why she turns into a panda and brings forth the conflict of wanting to hide these transformations in the public. While I can't really argue that the premise itself does seem light on the surface, that isn't really something I would feel comfortable avoiding a movie because of coming from the trailer, since it could simply be that the trailer is just a baseline of the conceit, as seen with the focus on the girl's four-town obsession in the first half of the trailer, giving away the importance of their presence in the movie, even if a lot of that importance does happen off-screen or in montage form. That being said, I can definitely say that what the trailer depicts sounds like a typical teen sitcom plot with a twist added on top of it. I mean, I'm not expecting Inception from a kids movie or anything, but I can see how it does come across as light. That being said, I do kind of want to get onto you for judging a movie based on a trailer, either positively or negatively, to the point of avoiding it. Well, we'll get into your other reasons for wanting to avoid it in a moment, but I'm sorry, the trailer really shouldn't be part of that consideration to such a major degree that you feel it should be the first thing you bring up on why you waited to watch the movie. Comes across as, well, overly judgmental, even by reviewer standards.
And the other reason that I didn't want to watch Turning Red at first was because if I did, I knew I'd have to talk about it. And if I knew I had anything other than super glowing praise for it, we were going to have another Turtles situation.
I really hate this mentality. I've said it before and I'll say it again 1,000,000 times over. If you're giving your honest thoughts on something and not just talking out of your ass, then fuck the haters and say what you've got to say, because you're going to have more of an audience doing that than trying to pander. See, this is the problem I see with a lot of animation reviewers, and I could probably make a whole video about this, but y'all for real like to bandwagon on the popular opinion to the point where any dissension from the most popular talking heads in your community results in massive amounts of backlash. And if you don't believe me, I'm about to go into another Samurai Jack tangent. For those who don't know, shortly after Season 5 of Samurai Jack ended, I put out a video titled, Why Samurai Jack's Ending Doesn't Make Sense. I got bombarded with dislikes immediately. Although, to be fair, I was halfway expecting a lot worse than that. When the comments started coming in, there was actually some healthy debate rather than people calling me a loudmouth idiot, like that one guy did this year in his video. Not going to name any names here, but y'all know who I'm talking about. Now, I've mentioned this happening several times, but you know what I haven't mentioned? How Pan Pizza released a video 4 days later. 4 days. And heaped a ton of praise on the series as a whole, but glossed over the fact that, well, there were logical inconsistencies in the way that things ended. He did criticize it though, and was willing to say that the ending had problems. After that video, people suddenly started asking in that comment section why I had so many dislikes on my video. I don't know, maybe because I said it before Pan did? The fact that I got a ton of dislikes on that video honestly didn't piss me off, because part of that meant that I had a lot of people who cared what I was saying and were listening to me. What pissed me off about all that was the fact that suddenly I wasn't controversial when Pan Pizza parroted what I had to say, admittedly, even if he wasn't aware of the fact that I had already said it. This isn't an indictment on Pan Pizza. This is an indictment on you. Yes, you. The person watching this. The one that would ream someone in the comment section for having a hot take because you're too fucking white to handle a bit of cayenne in your intellectual discourse. You know what I did when you came knocking? I let you roll off my back, honey. That's not to say that someone's hot take is incapable of being bad, but I think that's the point I'm making here to Mr. Enter. If what you're saying is in good faith, then you shouldn't be worried about the people who are going to argue with you in bad faith. That mentality right there, that's what's causing the animation reviewers to become this giant echo chamber of boring sing-song channels spouting the same hymns over and over again in another echo chamber of gag me. Like, I'm not even saying people can't legitimately have the same opinion, but what I am saying here is that what you just said now is the fucking problem with your community. And as a theoretical thought leader, the one that tends to be viewed as a lolcow, you have the ability to do something about it by telling those who want to continue dragging your name through the mud for having so much as a different opinion to fuck off. Now, some of you are probably asking, Boon, aren't you telling him to ignore what you have to say in this video as well? No, stupid. Did you even watch the beginning of this video?
So I watched the film, and I have something other than super glowing praise for it. And now I'm going to talk about it. With the chaos and the drama this movie has caused, it's really tempting to just go one way or the other. Praise it for being shocking and daring and tackling new ground. Or to go in the other direction and absolutely eviscerate the film. It's really cementing itself with the Ghostbusters effect. It's not a movie, it's a political argument. Like Thundercats Roar, High Guardian Spice, or Masters of the Universe Revelation before it. Or She-Ra, or I can keep going on. These arguments are largely annoying, and they shouldn't be engaged in on any side of the argument, whether you're a defender or a detractor. If you're a detractor, it elevates the status of the movie and gives it more importance than it really deserves. If you're a defender, you obscure the actual merits of the movie and turn it into a target, which actually does hurt the artists in the long run, and hurts the actual political headway of whatever movement you're arguing for even more. Oh, that's not even mentioning that you're playing pawns to billion-dollar corporations that have packaged your personal values and have sold them back to you.
Thank you! I am so tired of every single work of fiction needing to be an entire political movement. I will disagree with you on one point, though. If something does have a political undertone or message that it conveys, or there are politics involved in it, then it's actually worth bringing those up. To sort of, well, refine your point, politics should never be the thing in and of itself, but rather should be an element of discussion. I'm pretty sure even a casual viewing of Boon Canon 50 will elaborate on my stance here, but needless to say, while I agree that the dogmatization of fiction is unhealthy, I think discussing the political implications of work is a useful tool of discourse, even if ideology shouldn't be the driving force behind the discourse on the work.
So Turning Red stars an Asian Canadian girl named Miley, growing up in Toronto in 2002, where one night she learns that she becomes a giant red panda whenever she feels any particularly strong emotions. This is complicated by the fact that she has an overbearing mother, is going through middle school, and puberty. It's a fairly simple movie despite all the drama, and yet there's a ton to talk about. I'm going to start with what held me back from actually enjoying the movie, and that is May's mother, Ming. I'm gonna be dead straight with you. I hated this character so much that I thought I would have to stop watching the movie. Ming is a helicopter parent, the type who controls every little thing about their child's life and are super panicked that a slight deviation from their plan will harm their child. So they create this self-fulfilling prophecy, where they hurt their child so much more than the rest of the world could. Every time that Ming was on screen, I was angry.
While I'm gonna go over this more during your actual examples of what she did, I will point out that the purpose of the character is to be overbearing and learn how to not be that. We also get a lot of context on top of this as well, seeing as how we meet her own mother who had the same controlling attitude as her and how miserable it makes her, indicating that it's not just malicious on her part. And yeah, I know this is kind of that's the point counter argument, which doesn't really do much to dissuade his dislike. He can understand the purpose and context and still not like it, but that's where I want to go into his examples, because well, there's disliking a character archetype in general, and then there's the way he describes her.
The two most infamous bits you've probably heard of, when she finds drawings of May's crush and drives her down to the store to show the boy in them what May did. And the other time is when she came down to school unprompted to try and give May menstrual pads without any self-awareness that she was doing it in front of her whole class. There's also a third moment that really struck me, and that's when May goes to Tyler's party, and Ming was so blind to any possible reasons that May might rebel, especially after the first two incidents, that she basically stops May from seeing her friends. Every time Ming was on screen, this was some of the most uncomfortable a Disney Pixar film has ever made me feel.
Alright, so that's kind of a stretch. First example I'll actually give you to an extent. It was an overreaction, and I kind of felt the same way, but it comes across as overly protective more so than outright malicious. I don't exactly agree with your reaction being so strong on this, but I get it. Then we get to your shit tier reactions. Okay, so for one, she actually was initially trying to be subtle about getting her the pads, which is something you're going to criticize later in the actual infamous part of the review. You know, before she was already making a scene, so at that point her daughter's well-being was more important to her than the embarrassment. I don't know how you call out the fact that she was sneaking around while also ignoring it. That is impressively stupid. Finally, the third example. Okay, for one, this is actually because Mei Lin was deceiving her mother into thinking she wasn't being rebellious. Like, she had been actively hiding it from her mother, and the movie itself portrays the fact that Mei didn't tell the truth here as a betrayal of her friends. How is this on Ming? Maybe the fact that she couldn't see that she was making her daughter unhappy. Sure, in that instance, it's on Ming. But it also stems from May's dishonesty. This moment was actually very well put together because the fault for this altercation was legitimately a two-way street. Both characters had to grow in order to get past this. Like, again, to some degree, I get your criticism even if I don't agree with it. But to another, I feel like you just weren't paying attention to the movie.
And need I remind you that this is a film about puberty, in which the problem is solved with twerking.
How has no one talked about this comment? First of all, that was intended to offend her mother to draw attention away from people actually trying to solve the problem. And look, I know the problem was solved with a song, but that distraction and provocation was before that even happened. I'd even argue that it wasn't actually twerking, but well, fuck, we'll really be here all week if I have to delve into those semantics. Just know that you are, in fact, too white to know what twerking actually looks like. You know, you primarily move your hips up and down and not jump up and down on the balls of your toes when you're twerking, right?
So, defenders will rush and say that this behavior is accurate, especially in Asian communities. And there's a kernel of truth to the kernel of truth here. Asian communities are definitely at least stereotypically strict in upbringing. So, pardon my ignorance. Is it realistic to take a child's drawing of a crush, drag her down to a convenience store, and confront the person in said drawing in a store full of people? Especially if you are under the delusion that these things actually happened, despite one of the drawings being the boy as a merman.
Yes, actually. Okay, so not only are you too white, you are also not Southern enough. My God, you must be one of those gross Midwest white people. Ew.
Is it really realistic to try and directly give menstrual pads to someone and not leave them with a nurse at school?
Maybe not, but, well, fuck. You're about to go there yourself, so fuck it, I'll just let you say it.
Ming's behavior is too over the top. Actually, no, it's not. That's actually the problem. The problem is that it's realistic. It's something that could feasibly happen if you were one of the worst, most brain-dead people on Earth.
This statement is so self-contradictory, it's making my eyes burn, and I'm not even reading it. Okay, so, like, the response to the critique that being overbearing is realistic is to call out her actions for not being realistic, and then proceed to say the problem is that it's realistic and not over the top enough, while saying it's realistic for someone with the over-the-top level of stupidity. Is it realistic or over the top? Are you trying to say it's in a middle ground? My head hurts from even trying to parse where you're putting this complaint to the point where I'm starting to think you don't even know what the problem is.
It's not like, say, Doofenshmirtz, who also had a hard upbringing. So hard that neither of his parents showed up for his actual birth.
I'm sorry, your metric for how over the top it should be is the physically impossible? Why is no one talking about how bad this comparison is?
If you want to talk about realism, we need to talk about Encanto. This was a Disney film also about generational trauma, which seems to be the theme of the season. Mirabel's grandmother was guilty of pretty much the same things, being overly controlling, trying to keep her family in the perfect boxes that she imagined for them. Of course, Encanto didn't make me want to smash my computer because it was subtle. You could constantly understand the reasons that Alma was doing the things that she was doing, even if you didn't agree with them. And in the end, you want to see Alma get better, not have her taken away in the back of a police car.
You think embarrassment is worthy of arrest? That's your benchmark? Or are you being over the top right now? I can't tell. It's kind of a middle ground. I kind of get what the point here is, though. Encanto's storytelling does a better job of having Alma's actions make sense to you than this movie does. I've explained why I disagree on at least two of these fronts, but to be fair, it's impressive that you managed to get me this warmed up and we're not even on the shit I'm actually doing this commentary for yet.
This is like trying to redeem Doofenshmirtz's parents and doing it in a realistic way, and have it all heartfelt at the end.
But didn't you say this wasn't as over the top as Doofenshmirtz's parents? Literally 30 seconds ago? Alright, so much for any credit that I gave you here.
She comes across as psychotic. Luckily for the film, anytime that Ming isn't on screen, the movie gets a lot better. I wouldn't call it one of Pixar's best, still, but it would have been a tier above something like Onward, which felt a lot like wasted potential. Part of the Ming problem actually comes from the movie's style. It is a very much in-your-face, and takes a lot of cues from anime, with even mundane things being shot as over the top as possible, which is a baffling choice if you're making something that's supposed to tell some kind of down-to-earth lesson.
Not really. Fuck, you even pointed out how the film takes cues from anime, and it uses the in-your-face and fantastical elements in order to get you to pay attention to the grounded aspects. Like, you know Sailor Moon, right? Sailor Moon did the exact same thing in Japan as well as in America, by the way, and so did Cardcaptor Sakura. Hell, even looking to American television animation, there's also Power Rangers during especially its first few seasons, and an example that I haven't personally watched, even if I'm rather aware of it, Winx Club. There's several other examples I could go off on, but I think you get my point. Combining fantasy with reality, especially when it comes to things made for children, isn't out of place at all. And high energy animation is definitely not out of place, no matter what you're talking about in that regard. And sure, you certainly can keep things more grounded overall, but that doesn't mean it's weird to not do so.
This movie really feels like it was made for the TikTok generation. I mean, it was, obviously. It was released in 2022. But the movie also takes place in 2002. And that creates many problems with the film.
Does it? Does it now? Okay, so before he continues, let me explain something. Yes, this is the thing I was here for. And now let me go ahead and explain why. Because this one gets a little personal for me. There's a reason I feel so comfortable covering this more in depth than anybody else realistically could. no matter how long it's been since the original video came out. And that's because I lived this. In the year 2002, I was in 9th grade, using the time of year relevant to this movie. So I'm like a year off from being a middle schooler at the exact moment in time this movie was supposed to take place in. I know what was going on during that time period very well, although admittedly, I was close to as far away from Toronto as a US citizen could get, so I had to do a little extra research on the differences in what was popular between the two countries. So, I know quite a bit about how accurate the cultural iconography of this time period would be. So, y'all probably have some indications of what my problems here are gonna center around, right?
Like, I hear some of the slang in this film, like the word besties, and while that term did apparently exist way back when, you would not be hearing that in middle school.
This is the one you're the least wrong about, and also the most wrong about. It's possible it was used in 2002 at some point, I'm sure, but wasn't really popularized in the US until 2010. Now, granted, I can see a world where these guys were saying that, especially since the first known publication of the word was in 1991, and Canadian slang tends to connect more directly with British idioms than US slang does, which, by the way, Britain's where it comes from originally. And these guys were somewhat of social outcasts, so them having slang that other people didn't use very much could track in that sense. But that's me more trying to make it make sense rather than it inherently making sense on its own. So I wouldn't call that unfair criticism. More accurate slang for the time period would probably be BFF. So, like I said, the most and somehow also least accurate.
The movie also overestimates how common cell phone use was among middle schoolers at the time. It wasn't until the mid to late 2000s when cell phones became a common thing in middle schools.
And then we get to actual full-on inaccuracy. Yeah, that one's outright not true. I was actually made fun of in middle school for not having a cell phone, and that was before 2002, lest we forget. Yeah, I know, anecdotal evidence, shut up. I'm gonna back this up. Before 2002, there were bans in a lot of US schools on cell phone usage, which is why you really only saw them when the teacher wasn't looking. There's a big reason these bans were relaxed or even lifted in some cases in 2002, the year we're talking about, but their popularity in schools was more so seen around 1995 with high schoolers and closer to 1998 with middle schoolers. Oh, and then there's this little shit right here. Yeah, there's a reason they were going bankrupt, wasn't there? Might have something to do with those cell phones. Not that the 2001 bankruptcy was even when they went out of business. They actually sold their assets and reformed, dumbass. That's why they went bankrupt again in 2008, because, you know, they were still a company. Oh, and of course, even if that was the case, that doesn't mean the cameras that were already sold couldn't still be used. They were still made and can still function. It's not like what's already on the market ceases to exist. These weren't NFTs.
Like, unless the family was rich, even the adults at the time would be using beepers.
I'm sorry, you seem to be confusing 2002 with 1992. Please check yourself before you wreck yourself. Even if it's already too late for that.
The anime style also feels off due to the time period. While anime did exist in the West, obviously, besides Sailor Moon or Dragon Ball, Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh!, it was pretty niche until like 2005.
But man, the fuck you think Toonami was? Voltron, Robotech, Ronin Warriors, Gundam Wing, Tenchi, all the various Tenchi series, Blue Submarine No. 6, Outlaw Star, The Big O, Card Captors, and Zoids all hit Toonami before the year you're talking about. And that's me grouping together multiple shows that are part of the same continuity. See also the Tenchi example. That doesn't even consider what was going on Adult Swim, on Kids WB, on Fox Kids, or anything that aired during 2002. Oh, and it gets a lot worse for you considering this movie takes place in Canada, especially with Toronto. So, you may have heard of a studio called Ocean Productions. They do a lot of film and TV, but are most well known as a Canadian ADR company, doing the original dub for Dragon Ball Z. That aired on syndication in 1996. Oh, and do you remember that Mega Man cartoon from 1994? The Ruby Spears one? It was co-produced by Ashi Productions and directed by Katsumi Minakuchi. Like for fuck's sake, Inuyasha aired in 2002, you chuckle fuck! Do you want me to beat it any deeper into your head, or should I move on?
Then we started getting tricklings of things like Zatch Bell, One Piece, and so on.
Alright, I guess we're beating it deeper into your head. Astro Boy, 1963. Speed Racer, 1967. Gigantor, 1993. Techno Man, 1995. Digimon, 1999. Monster Rancher, also 1999. Dinosaurs, 2000. Escaflowne, 2000. Flinted Time Detective, 2000. Cubics, 2001. Metabots, hi Aaron, 2001. Mongolian Knights, 2001. Transformers, Robots in Disguise, yes it was an anime, 2001. These are all US air dates, and I'm leaving some out and putting some later than they originally fucking aired. Like when they hit like Toonami or Fox Kids or shit. You don't know jack about shit. The first issue of the NA version of Shonen Jump was November of 2002. Gee, I wonder why they thought people would buy it if it was so fucking obscure.
I mean, anime definitely was there, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't the styling of the time.
For middle schoolers? Oh yes, it fucking was. See, what someone like you may not remember and was covered in Boon Canon 46 was Pokemon actually opened the floodgate in 1999. Notice how many of my examples are from the couple of years right after that, or how most of what was coming out at the same time as Pokemon and anime were other monster collecting franchises before people realized that something different from Pokemon that also came from Japan would work better. Also, and here's something you may not have considered, do you think maybe a household of Asian descent would gravitate to the art style when they see it on television more quickly than one of European descent? From what I've been able to look up too, Japanese animation is actually more popular in China than it is in the US, and a lot of Chinese animation I've looked up uses a very similar art style, only using Chinese cultural meanings and iconography in place of Japanese ones. So, you know, what this movie is doing.
Speaking of which, by 2002, boy bands were on the way out. That is literally the year that Justin Timberlake went solo, effectively ending the craze for a decade.
Okay, so this is wrong on several levels. First of all, the trend didn't die. NSYNC didn't actually officially break up until Justin Timberlake's solo tour, which began in 2003. And even then, the album you're talking about didn't come out until November of 2002, which is especially relevant given the fact that the movie takes place in May. Then, of course, there's the fact that NSYNC's celebrity tour concluded literally 1 month before the date of this movie's concert takes place on. And I can go even further than that. 2 dates on that tour were canceled, namely the March 22nd and March 23rd shows. And you know where those two were? Toronto and Montreal. In addition, according to what archived records there are of the Canadian Billboard Hot 100 from 2002, Girlfriend by NSYNC featuring Nelly was #1 on the week of April 27th. Now that's only 1 week at #1, sure, and I'll get more into what is topping those charts as we go, but do you really think it just completely went away when it wasn't #1? No, of course not, dumbass, and this was also within a month of the entirety of the fucking movie. Never mind the fact that there were several other groups around during this time, even if they weren't directly in the US pop scene as much. Soul Decision, B2K, Drew Hill's comeback, S Club 7, real relevant when we're talking about middle schoolers here, no cap, and probably a bunch of others I forgot, but I think you get my point. I probably could go on if I really tried, but I have plenty else to go on about. Oh, but then we get to the idea that boy bands dying out for 10 years. So that would mean there weren't any more boy bands until 2012, right? Jonas Brothers, 2008. Backstreet Boys released Never Gone, otherwise known as the one without Nick Carter, in 2005, and the only reason it took that long was because of legal disputes with Jive. They would release 2 more studio albums, the ones without Kevin Richardson, before 10 years had passed since 2002, and that's not even counting the 2 greatest hits album, or the joint greatest hits album as NKOTBSB with New Kids on the Block, which also made a comeback in 2008, which as a reminder is less than 10 years from 2002. That's not even talking about Big Time Rush from 2009, the existence of Boyz II Men, proving that it's straight up impossible to kill the boy band trend, and Backstreet Boys ain't enough proof of that for you. And I'm gonna get more into this later, but there's a reason that 4town in this movie falls more in line with NSYNC, and fun fact, Justin Timberlake's solo album were doing more than what Backstreet was doing at the time. But, well, I mentioned Nelly was featured on the #1 single, right? There's a hint to what I'm gonna ream you for later right here.
2002 wasn't a very in-your-face time either. It was quiet. It was grungy. Linkin Park was one of the biggest bands in the world.
And you want to talk about boy bands being on the way out. Hybrid Theory was big primarily in 2000 and 2001. 2002 was the down year for Linkin Park. It was actually much more the year of Ashanti, if anything, given her song Foolish, considering she shows up in 5 of the year-end 100, with all of them being in the top 50. Or, for that matter, Nelly, who admittedly only appears 3 times, but not only are all of those in the top 50, 2 of them are in the top 5, which Linkin Park couldn't break into this year. In fact, most of the top charts in 2002, and 2001 for that matter, were rap or R&B with rock kind of sprinkled in. 2002 was definitely in your face. After all, Nickelback had the biggest song of the year, much to the chagrin of literally everyone. And see, this is another point I want to bring up. 2002 wasn't just one thing. It could be in your face and colorful, and in other areas also darker and moodier. If anything, the dark, moody atmosphere was more of what was on the way out for the next couple years if 2003 and 2004 charts, seeing the rise of crunk, was any indication.
Everyone was emotional and full of angst. Like, there's one guy in the school who has this emo look, and yeah, that is 2002 right there. The whole movie should look like that.
No, it shouldn't. Like, even comparing it to US television at the time, this was the year The Bachelor debuted. This was Chalk Zone, my guy. Even professional wrestling was dialing back the edge. And, well, actually, that's not true. He had that feud with Kurt Angle. They were actually pushing him pretty hard at the time. Not the point. The point is that you don't know what you're talking about. To even imply the whole movie should have been one thing when 2002 had so many different things going on is ludicrously short-sighted. And I don't mean the rapper. Don't be ridiculous. Except his name's not ridiculous. It's ludicrous. But you shouldn't be ludicrous either. And I mean the word, not the... You know what?
And that's partially because there's an elephant in the room that you do have to realize if you want to say, golly geez, let's set this film in 2002 for no reason. This film takes place less than a year after the September 11th terrorist attacks. I bring this up because it radically altered the culture of the time, in ways that make this movie feel exceptionally ignorant of the time. Even though, literally, the only reason I can comprehend that this movie is set explicitly in 2002 is because the director grew up in that exact year. Yes, this film takes place in Canada, not the United States, but all over the Western world. Canada, America, the UK, much of Europe. People were paranoid because 9/11 wasn't the only terror attack that had happened. It was the major theme of the decade.
Okay. Here comes the big controversial thing. A lot of people online tried to interpret what he's saying here as him bitching that the movie didn't talk about 9/11, which isn't actually what he's saying, as I'll dissect more in a moment. What he's saying is that the tone doesn't line up because people were paranoid, which isn't entirely true. While there were 1 or 2 other incidents in Canada and the UK around this time, most of what was happening in relation to terrorism were actually arrests and convictions related to plots from the 80s and early 90s. And admittedly, I didn't even know that was going on at the time, but this is me looking into it later. It definitely wasn't the major theme of the decade, but I'll get into that in a moment. So first I want to describe my own experiences with what I saw the day of the attacks. I don't remember every exact detail, but the fact that I don't is kind of part of the point I'm making, so hear me out here. I remember it was near the beginning of English class, first period. I didn't even see the news broadcast of what was happening or anything. We were just told what was going on. And then our day continued like normal. People got scared, yes, but we also insisted on not living in fear because that was viewed as letting the terrorists win. We figure out how it happened, take measures to prevent it in the future, and we move on while doing so. That's what actually happened. It did have some effect on people's everyday lives in the US. Remember what I said about cell phone bans in schools being loosened in 2002? So what do you think prompted that? Could it possibly be that the paranoia you're describing made parents want to keep closer contact with their kids even when they were in school? Could it possibly be that the reason both emo music and club music were topping the charts was that we both knew we needed to process how we felt, but wanted to escape it at the same time? Do you think it's possible that the reason 2002's culture had such a mix of conflicting emotions depicted in what we consumed was because we were in a state of flux ourselves? There were so many shades of gray to entertainment in 2002, it was forming a fucking spectrum. There weren't 50, because that would be cringe. We wanted to escape, but also to fight. We wanted to grieve, and we also wanted to celebrate. We were in flux, Enter. And I can tell you exactly why you don't understand what was actually going on in 2002. But I feel like I should save it for my final thoughts. Oh, and nah, the paranoia was pretty much just the US, and that was mostly because we hadn't had it happen before.
I mean, I can understand not wanting everyone to be so fearful, as that goes against the tone that the movie is trying to establish. But then you have very awkward moments if you actually were there and you do actually remember the time period. Like, the moment with Ming, this strange adult standing outside of the school with a box.
What fucking box? She's not holding a box! She has a purse? The pads are in a purse? There's a box in her purse, if that's what you mean. There's no fucking box on display here, mate.
An adult that no one wants to account for, completely trying to obscure her appearance and getting attention of the kids in the school.
She was wearing sunglasses and was behind a tree. Sure, completely obscuring her appearance. Right.
In real world 2002, she wouldn't just be confronted by the school security guard. She would be tackled by the police and hauled in.
Yeah, I can tell you from firsthand experience, no, she wouldn't. She'd be approached by the security guard. Even an actual bomb threat would have been handled as quietly as possible for escalating it. Some other things about this too. For one, at the time, it would have been much more likely for someone to look suspicious if they were Muslim or black. Although the black part isn't really because of 9/11. She's Chinese. No one would have batted an eye at her, especially in Toronto. Whether it's right or wrong, stereotypes like this were a prevailing factor in how likely it is that someone is treated as a suspect of terrorism, which is also probably part of the reason the security guard wasn't as likely to jump down her throat as well. He's also Muslim. Second of all, in spite of your insistence otherwise, Canada does have a more liberal overall viewpoint, especially being led by literally any prime minister before Stephen Harper.
Like, here's the thing. If they picked 1999 or 2000 or literally any year that was not 2002, this movie's setting would make a lot more sense. 1999, I could buy the in-your-face attitude, the boy band stuff. That was an optimistic year, despite everything else going on at the time.
I can't really argue with you on 1999 being a good year to set the movie in, honestly. Well, I mean, I could. Although NSYNC was using some hip-hop influences in their music, the music being released that was actually like that wouldn't come out until 2000. Backstreet Boys were actually past their rap phrase by this point, and while the movie is bright, it's not saccharine like 1999 was, or like you're making it out to be.
And on top of that, the movie doesn't get anything at all by setting itself in 2002. The boy band Four Town could have been replaced with any other musical act.
Not really. It actually needed to be a primarily vocal ensemble for the way the ending was structured. It doesn't really work to have a rock band. Now, you could probably make the argument that it could have been a solo teen heartthrob instead of a boy band, but I also don't think the movie loses anything by making it a full ensemble. But still doesn't really gain anything other than having May crush on Robert without creating jealousy with her other friends over it. Although I'd argue that you could have used that as an angle as part of their conflict if you wanted to. So, you know, there's both good and bad things about what you're saying here.
The lack of cell phones and surveillance technology doesn't matter because May was caught on the news, and being hidden really isn't a goal in this film.
I'm sorry, were you not paying attention to why Ming was keeping May out of school or why she was refusing to let her go to the concert? Not being noticed was actually part of what several of the characters were trying to get done. Did you just completely let the actual plot of the first two acts fly over your head?
I mean, I wouldn't set it in 2022, obviously, but taking place in just a vague, unspecified time like any other Disney Pixar film would have done this one so much favor.
I mean, the characters knowing exact dates is kind of necessary for the movie to function, though. And let me ask you a question. Would you even bother questioning anything in this movie about 2002 if the movie just removed the year from what was said in the movie? So consider this. It is vague to a degree. It takes place in 2002, but can utilize elements from a little bit before or after 2002 because it's not really trying to be a historical retelling and more showing a story that takes place in that time frame. You know, like a piece of fiction or something. I'm just saying, not only are you wrong about the accuracy, you're also putting way too much weight on it. See, that's a common critique I see in a lot of your work, actually. You put so much weight on things that even as a critic, I couldn't give a shit about. And you know what? If that's what matters to you, fine. But it's one thing to be pedantic and another thing entirely to be pedantic and also wrong. See, here's the thing. I know exactly why you didn't understand 2002 as well as I did. While I was 15 in 2002, you were 10. 9 really when the movie takes place, but I digress. Now, I'm not going to claim you had to be there in order to understand what was really going on, and back in my day, you had to walk 15 miles uphill. But I will say that you honestly could have done better research on the time period if you were unsure about things. Like, that's just it. Your understanding of what culture was in 2002 is really based on what sounds like someone who simply looked at 9/11 and did research in order to specifically confirm what you thought was correct. The things you're saying aren't entirely untrue, but are so surface level that they get debunked with the very first instance of digging deeper, and some of it actually is untrue. It's not from the outside looking in just because you weren't there. It's from the outside looking in because you didn't go inside after the fact to see for yourself. Like, for instance, there's 1 or 2 things I could criticize about it being accurate. I initially felt the Tamagotchi was rather inaccurate to the timeline because they fell off in popularity in 1999 around when Digimon came out. Even though I still feel that way, my enjoyment of the movie isn't really lessened by the fact that it's there, especially since it's not really that far out of the timeline for it to exist, and I can accept this being a loose pastiche of 2002 rather than an exact recreation. Another thing, like the trailer uses It's Gonna Be Me by NSYNC, but that's actually the wrong era of NSYNC to use. It would have been more accurate to use a song from their album Celebrity, which came out in 2001, and could get bonus points by actually using, I'm going to name a specific song that I feel like they could have used. It's called Just Don't Tell Me That. It's like the 11th track on the album. It never got released as a single. It would probably be cheaper than It's Gonna Be Me. It would almost definitely be cheaper than It's Gonna Be Me. And it would serve to create an identity to the movie by using that in the trailer. And I'm sure the studio would be fine with releasing that song for use in this trailer. It also does subtly communicate the conflict with her mother with some of the lyrics, although admittedly with a little bit more of a loose interpretation. It's what I would have done knowing what they were trying to do with this movie, but it's really a nitpick at the end of the day, and I just kind of wanted to mention it. However, you seem to be under the impression that if the movie takes place in 2002, it has to be an exact time capsule of 2002, which doesn't track with me. I would give advice to enter here, but, well, to be honest, this wasn't the worst video in the world. Hell, I covered worse a couple of videos ago. You really think this is going to rile me up? Doesn't mean that it was perfect, and based on what I've said so far, obviously there's some accuracy issues with what you have to say that need work, but in spite of how I sounded earlier, I'm not really that mad about that. It's a performance at the end of the day. I do have a device for the people all over Twitter trying to drag Enter's name through the mud over something he didn't actually say, though. Some of y'all are even talking about past transgressions of his, probably because the controversy gives you an excuse to, and all kinds of dumb shit along those lines. For you dickweeds that just want to hop on a hate bandwagon because the bad man said he didn't like your precious movie, grow the fuck up.